Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive. This
Yeah.
time we're taking a look at a story that's thousands of years old, but surprisingly relevant today.
That's right. We're diving into the book of Exodus.
Exodus.
Period.
So, Exodus chapter 8. For anyone who maybe hasn't cracked open a Bible in a while, what's the basic setup here? What's going on?
Well, the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, and God is, shall we say, motivating Pharaoh to let them go.
Motivating is one way to put it. So, we're talking about the plagues, right?
Exactly. Chapter 8 is all about the plagues.
Okay, so for those who aren't familiar, give us a rundown of what goes down in chapter 8.
Well, it kicks off with God telling Moses to warn Pharaoh.
Warned him about.
Basically, let my people go or
Yeah.
else.
Or else?
And or else is where the plagues come in.
Makes sense. And what's
Yep.
the first plague that hits Egypt?
Frogs, and not just a few frogs here and there.
Yeah.
We're talking frogs everywhere.
Oh, I hate frogs.
In their houses, in their food, even in Pharaoh's bed.
I mean, I can see why that would be a problem, but was there a deeper meaning to this? I mean, why frogs?
In ancient Egypt, frogs were actually considered sacred. They were connected to Hecate, the goddess of fertility.
So this wasn't just gross, it was a direct challenge to their beliefs.
Exactly.
So how does Pharaoh react to this amphibian invasion?
He freaks out, begs Moses to make it stop, promises to let the Israelites go if he does. So Moses prays, the frogs die, Egypt stinks to high heaven from all the rotting frogs, but
But Pharaoh changes his mind.
classic Pharaoh.
So what's next? What's plague number 2?
Plague number 2 is lice. And this one's interesting because even Pharaoh's magicians, who up to this point have been able to copy some of the plagues, they can't handle this one.
Interesting.
And they actually admit this is the finger of God.
Wow. So even they're acknowledging that something bigger is going on here. So does this convince Pharaoh?
Nope, stubborn as ever. So on to plague number 3. Swarms of flies. And this time God makes a distinction. The flies torment Egypt, but the Israelites. They're chilling in Goshen, a land where the flies don't touch them.
Okay, so a clear line between who's being affected and who isn't.
Exactly.
So what happens? Does Pharaoh finally cave?
He almost does. He agrees to let the Israelites go to make sacrifices, but as soon as the flies are gone,
He reneges.
of course.
Typical.
Mm.
So we've got these plagues, these very dramatic displays of power. But what's the bigger picture here?
Yeah.
What can we learn from all this?
Well, that's what we're going to explore next. These plagues, as wild as they are, offer some pretty deep insights into leadership, the consequences of our actions, and the importance of, recognizing something greater than ourselves.
I'm definitely intrigued. Let's dive deeper. So we've got Pharaoh. Not exactly a poster child for good leadership, right?
Well, he certainly teaches us a thing or two about what not to do.
Yeah, what is it about us humans that makes it so hard to admit when we're wrong? I mean, look at Pharaoh.
It's that good old ego, isn't it? Nobody wants to back down, lose face, admit they made a mistake.
And it seems like the more powerful someone is, the harder it is for them to change course.
Right. It's that whole power corrupts idea. But the thing is, Pharaoh's stubbornness, it didn't just affect him. It had these massive consequences for everyone around him.
Yeah, I mean, think about the suffering he inflicted on his own people, not to mention the Israelites.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how do we break free from those patterns? How do we become leaders who actually care about the well-being of others?
Compassionate leadership,
right.
right. But what does that even look like in practice?
Well, for starters, it means recognizing that we don't have all the answers. Being open to different perspectives, even if they challenge our own.
Humility, in other words.
Exactly. And being willing to change course when we realize we're on the wrong path.
Even if it means admitting we messed up.
Exactly. It takes courage to do that, but it's so important. Now, on the flip side, you've got the Israelites. Talk about resilience. They kept their faith even when things looked bleak.
And that faith, it wasn't just some passive thing. They actively resisted oppression. It makes you think about those times in our own lives when we feel powerless.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even when things seem impossible, there's always hope.
Always hope. So we've talked about leadership, faith, but there's another layer to this story that I think is relevant today.
You're talking about the plagues themselves.
Yeah, I mean, frogs, lice, flies, it's like this total disruption of the natural order.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about how we treat the environment today, right?
Right? All the ways we mess with the balance of nature without considering the consequences.
Exactly. It's like we're constantly tempting fate, pushing things too far. And just like with Pharaoh, those consequences, they might not be immediate, but they're coming.
So are you saying we're all kind of like Pharaoh in a way?
Maybe a little bit. But the good news is we can learn from his mistakes. We can choose to respect the boundaries, to find a way to live in harmony with nature.
Okay, so we've got leadership, faith, the environment.
Mm,
But there's one more thing that really stood out to me.
what's that?
The plagues, they were so specific. They only hit the Egyptians. The Israelites in Goshen, they were totally fine.
Oh, right. That's such an interesting detail. And I think it gets at this idea of boundaries and respecting differences. God protected the Israelites even though they were living right in the middle of it all.
Like a powerful metaphor, right? You can have different beliefs, different ways of life, and still coexist peacefully.
Exactly. It's a lesson we could all stand to learn, especially in today's world. I mean, think about how much conflict stems from trying to impose our will on others.
Forcing everyone to conform to our way of thinking.
Right. But Exodus 8, it shows us a different way, a way of respecting boundaries, honoring differences.
It's a powerful message. But it also makes me wonder, if we were in Pharaoh's shoes, right in that moment, facing those plagues, would we have acted any differently? Would we have been more willing to change?
It's a tough question, isn't it? It's easy to judge Pharaoh from where we're sitting.
Right, thousands of years later.
Exactly. But what if we were right there, feeling the pressure, the fear?
The frogs.
Oh, the frogs. Definitely the frogs. But seriously, would we have the humility, the courage to admit we were wrong and change course?
Especially when you've got everyone looking to you, depending on you.
Right. All those advisors whispering in your ear, don't give in, you're the Pharaoh. It's a real test of character.
So what can we learn from Pharaoh's mistakes? I mean, how can we avoid falling into those same traps in our own lives?
Well, for one thing, I think it's about being aware of our own ego.
Yeah, that little voice inside that says, I'm right no matter what.
Exactly. And learning to question that voice, to be open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we don't have all the answers.
Being willing to listen to others even when we don't agree with them.
Right. And to admit when we've made a mistake, that's a big one.
It's not easy.
No, it's not. But it's so important because when we cling to our pride, when we refuse to change, we end up hurting ourselves and those around us.
Just like Pharaoh.
Just like Pharaoh. But there's hope, right? I mean, the Israelites, they ultimately found freedom.
They did. And it makes you think, maybe the real plagues aren't the frogs and the lice.
What do you mean?
Maybe the real plagues are the ones we carry inside us. The pride, the stubbornness, the fear that keeps us from changing, from growing.
That's a really powerful thought. And it makes me think that maybe the journey out of Egypt, it's not just about physical freedom. It's about freeing ourselves from those internal chains.
Exactly. It's about becoming more compassionate, more understanding, more willing to see things from different perspectives.
And that's a journey that each of us has to make for ourselves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Exodus chapter 8, I think the question we're left with is, what are the plagues we need to overcome in our own lives? What are those things that are holding us back from true freedom?
It's a question worth pondering. And hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.